Welcome to TESO Consulting Group's DEI podcast series, Why Is It So Hard? Shining Through the Shadow of Resistance. I'm Dr. Tonya Breland.
And I am Erika Lee.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, everybody.
We are here again, and
Yes,
we are always grateful for those of you who join us. I'm Tonya.
And I'm Erika, and this is another episode of our podcast, Why Is This So Hard? Shining Through the Shadow of Resistance. And in this podcast series, we discuss issues that prevent us from being socially just and free. So the goal here is to disrupt the status quo and to be the change that we all want to see.
Yes.
So what are we talking about today, Tonya?
Today we are talking about standing at the corner of race and gender. Yeah.
Okay.
And we can speak to that because that's what we have had to do.
Absolutely.
When we talk about that, you shared with us, the inspiration behind our title.
Yeah. So we're really thinking about intersectionality. When we think about intersections, I think about my father, who was born and raised in Philadelphia. And so when we would, go to Philadelphia or talk about Philly, he never used the word intersection. He would always say at the corner of. So at the corner of Broad and Spring Garden, or at the corner of 17th and Ridge, or whatever he was talking about. And so I just thought about that language, the place where, the roads meet, that corner, right? The place where these two concepts or these two realities meet. And so today we're talking about really intersectionality around race and genders. Race and gender.
Yeah.
So standing at the corner of race and gender.
So
yes.
How do you define, intersectionality?
So
and you can use the work of Kimberly Crenshaw.
Thank you, Kimberly. Yes. So Kimberly Crenshaw says that intersectionality is the idea that individuals can experience discrimination and oppression in unique and complex ways when their social identities overlap and intersect.
So we have to talk about social identities,
yes.
so that
right.
we know
right.
what we're talking about.
So your social identity is sort of like you as a part of a social group that you're a part of. Right. So African American or female or middle class, like these are all groups.
Right.
And if you are a part of any of those groups, that is a part of your social identity.
Right.
It's not the sum total of your identity. It's just a piece of your identity. Right. So it's a piece of your social identity.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's not uncommon to be a woman of color, to be a person of color and be a woman.
That's right.
And see that there may be some struggles.
That's right.
That happen as a result of either being a woman or either being a person of color.
That's right.
And that absolutely happens when we talk about intersectionality. It can happen with any of the social statuses.
Yes. Yes.
Today our focus is going to be honed in around, race and gender, because it's kind of unique to some of the challenges that we face as women of color.
Yeah.
And so we kind of want to talk about some of that. Even thinking about, when we were children, and messages that we received about either being a woman or being a Black girl, being a girl or being Black and a girl. I always, as an adult, as a young adult, I used to hear that, because I'm a Black girl or a Black woman, I'm going to have to do that much more to get ahead.
Sure.
It's almost like I have to prove myself as a woman and I have to prove myself as a Black person.
Yes.
Because there are preconceived notions oftentimes in society that say, women can or cannot do X, Y, Z.
Sure.
Or Black people can or cannot do X, Y, Z.
Sure.
And so we kind of want to shed a little light on what it's like to live in our skin.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up, kind of growing up because I have four brothers. I have no sisters. And so there was a lot of, first of all, we're African American family growing up in the Christian tradition. And so there was a lot that came with that in terms of culture and in terms of our rules and what you can do, what you can't, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, those kinds of things. But then there was another layer, I think, for me being a girl and the only girl, right? I was my daddy's baby.
I know you
Okay,
were.
right? Daddy's girl. And my mom is my mom's girl too. So I was pretty coddled. Thank you, mom and dad. But there was a lot in terms of, there were a lot of messages in terms of kind of what I could or couldn't do as a girl, right? So some of it I loved, the dresses and getting my hair done.
Sure.
But all of those were expectations because the boys, like all their stuff, my mom would always say, oh, it's so easy to get the boys ready. You on another hand, I couldn't take another girl because there was a lot of fuss around how I looked and how I presented. And it was just another layer of that as a girl. And so very early on, there were these messages for me around looks, right? But also the fact that because most of the spaces that we went into were diverse. So there were, Black people and white people and Hispanic and Asian. And so because of that, like my parents were very, very aware of the spaces that we went into when we were the only African Americans. And so just like you were saying, like you got to do that much more. They were that much more conscious about how we presented ourselves. So there was always this feeling of there was a heightened awareness of our behavior, of how we looked and what we said.
Absolutely.
Right? And my parents' warning, don't you embarrass me in front of these people. Right? That was right.
Yes. And so, these people meant people that were not Black people.
That's right. That's exactly what that meant. That's exactly what that meant. And so, so I think very early on, there was especially when we went outside of the house, huge messages and expectations around what we will and will not do, what we can and cannot do because of the race that we represent, and for me because of the gender that I was born into.
Right.
Yeah.
Very similar, very, very similar experiences. But it was also that religious piece. So I think I've shared in previous podcast episodes that my father was a pastor. So it was also that pressure that I had to deal with. So, we kind of came up in that generation of, children are to be seen and not heard. And so as a girl, I felt that there was even more pressure to not be heard. And if I'm going to be seen, I'm going to be seen in a certain way.
Yes.
So, I am not going to be showing my body in any way.
Right.
My legs aren't going to be out. I'm going to wear a skirt or a dress if I'm in church. We didn't wear pants to church.
No, we did not. Better not.
No, absolutely not. And for whatever reason, we just accepted this because that was the norm.
Yeah.
But we also grew up with the whole same expectation. You don't walk out the house with your hair uncombed, with, clothes that look a certain way. Your clothes need to be neatly ironed, and you've got to represent.
That's right.
I don't know that my brother had the same level of pressure when it came to how he looked when he walked out the house.
My brothers absolutely did not. They absolutely did not.
And if you're watching, brothers of hers, there's a message. There's a message there.
Yes.
Right. And so we had to represent ourselves a certain way. So it was almost like, we heard terms like ladylike.
Yes.
You need to be ladylike in public.
Right.
And ladylike meant your legs were not apart if you're sitting down. You would cross your legs at the ankle so that your knees are closed.
That's right.
And I'm serious.
All of this,
Right.
yes.
Meanwhile, the guys can do whatever they want,
Whatever.
looking
Practically
however.
lay it across the table. Like,
Exactly. Right.
yeah.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
it was absolutely
It
ridiculous.
was.
But it was this standard
Yeah.
that was placed on our shoulders
Mm-hmm.
that we had to represent.
Yeah.
We represent our family,
Yes.
and this is what we do representing our family.
Yeah, I just thought about another thing that my mother used to always be like, oh. So they had this thing about not only were children to be seen and not heard, but young ladies
Yeah.
didn't, speak too loudly or laugh too loudly. And here I am, I talked loud, I laughed loud, and I talked really fast, and I talked a lot. And there was always this reminder of young ladies, and I kept waiting for the maturity to kick in where I didn't talk so much or so loud or whatever. And that never happened. It never happened. I never got my lady voice, So, sorry, Mom. But those were but now my brothers, on the other hand, they would, come into a room and just be like a gaggle of, loud and boisterous, and that was okay. That was actually
Yeah.
expected and encouraged, And even like I had one brother who was pretty quiet, and they tried to encourage him to, talk more and talk louder. And I, on the other hand, is like, I can do it, And they're like, not you, not you. We're talking to him, But there were these expectations around, how you comport yourself.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that was like very, and I think it's not only sort of like this African American tradition, but I think both of us having grown up in the church, you probably have an extra layer of expectations being, the pastor's kid, but there were these expectations around, how you carry yourself. And my mom talked to me a lot about how you carry yourself.
Yes.
She used that term a lot.
I heard that term too.
As a young lady, and my dad's, extra, and we're African American too, and we're Black too, and we're going into this space, and you need to be able to, carry yourself a certain way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. That is totally my experience. And it was like, because if you didn't do that, not only were you going to be an embarrassment to the family or to yourself, but people weren't going to take you seriously.
That's right.
They're not going to take you seriously if you don't present yourself or carry yourself a certain way as a lady first, and then as a Black person, because we are in a society where Black people are marginalized and there's a lot of bias against Black people. And so we need to be different. We need to come across differently.
And better.
Even the way we speak needs to be, in a way that would allow us to be accepted.
Right.
If you
That's
will.
right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And failure to do that, right, really meant, I think in our circles, it actually could lead to a loss of opportunities, because you're not going to go out there and embarrass us.
Right.
You're not going to go out there and, show yourself to be, not worthy of this opportunity. And so you wouldn't get recommended for a program, or you wouldn't get recommended for, a really great opportunity that could help you either, in even the athletes. I can remember like my friends who were, high school athletes, and there was an expectation that even as athletes, they carry themselves a certain way. There was a standard that, they had as girls that did not really, it was not an expectation for the boys. Yeah. And so that was, but there still was this, even the coaches and the teachers, you're going into this space. You're going to have to carry yourself in a certain way.
But even if you wanted a job. So, if you want a job, Tonya, if you want a job, Erika, there's a way that you're going to come in to interview for that job. And it's going to start with the hair.
Yes.
All the way down to what you have on your feet.
That's right.
And so my hair is straightened right now, and it's not usually straightened. But growing up, it was the straightened hair that got the job.
That's right. I can remember my first job. We actually had like the little, which I think was pretty progressive for the 80s, I guess. But we had like this little office, and if you wanted a job, you go and talk to this guy, and he'll help you get a job. the first thing he said was, you need to make sure, your hair is either pulled back, you don't want to cause no braids, whatever.
No extra
That was
attention.
not, that's right, to your hair. He said, let me see your fingernails. And at the time, I was like 15 and I had like half a, polish on, he said, either have polish all the way on or all the way off.
But don't wear red polish.
Don't wear red
because
polish.
That was for the fast
Yes,
girls.
it was. That's right. That's right. But, and he said, and wear a skirt. Don't go in there with pants.
Right.
I said, well, I have slacks. Don't
Nope.
wear a skirt.
Absolutely.
You must
the job
wear a
interview
skirt.
always had on a
You must
always
wear
had
a
on
skirt.
a skirt or a dress.
Right.
But that was what was required of us. That's how we were reared.
That's how we were groomed. You know what I mean? To do exactly
because
that.
What our parents in that generation was really trying to do was they were trying to get us accepted.
That's right.
They were trying to, position us in the best possible light.
Yes.
If it's interesting, if you look at old pictures from, the 50s and the 60s, and you would see if black people were out in public, black women always had on dresses. They always looked like they were going to church.
Yes.
The men would wear suits and ties and dress shoes
all the time.
And it makes sometimes I would look at those pictures like, well, did they have sneakers? Like,
right. How comfortable?
Or
yeah.
tennis shoes. I grew up saying tennis shoes. Did they have tennis shoes? And I've never seen that.
Yeah.
And I think there's a judgment that comes, and it's a little harder for us as Black women. There's a judgment against us if we don't present ourselves a certain way.
That's right.
And so it was interesting some years ago when I was interviewing teachers for teaching positions in the school where I was the principal. What I noticed was there was a difference between how the women came in dressed, and in particular how the Black women came in dressed as compared to their white peers who were interviewing for jobs. So what was really obvious to me was the Black women that would come in to apply for a teaching job look like how your parents and my parents would make us, would groom us.
Yes.
But I would see, I would interview, some white candidates for the job who would come in with a sweater and some slacks, and, they looked very relaxed.
Sure.
And it was like, they're here for a job interview? I remember thinking that because of the way that I was reared.
Yes.
But if we understand what was behind that rearing was really about, like, if you're going to be accepted in the workplace, you've got to present yourself a certain way because you already have, what did we hear? Two strikes against us.
You. That's right.
We did not rehearse this, by the way.
No, we did
this
not.
This was not, right. But
yes,
we would hear that you're a girl and you're a Black girl. And so you already have these two strikes against. That is what we heard often.
All the time. And that's funny that you talk about, interviewing, because I can remember the state agency that we worked for sitting on those teams of interviewers. And, when I got to the agency in the late 90s or so, I can remember the same thing. So the African American women that came in, suits like the matched gray corporate suits, and there was a formality in terms of the interview and the language, and it wasn't the same for I would say people who were not people of color, right? So it wasn't the same for white candidates. Much more relaxed, much more informal. And I can remember having a conversation where someone on the interview team said, well, I don't know if she would be a good fit, talking about an African American woman. She just seems really distant, and she seems really, I don't know that she'll really mix well with the team. I said, she was an African American woman coming into an interview. This is what we were taught to do. So if we're not going to talk about the qualifications here, so it was good that I was there. We talked about allyship before. It was good that I was there to just sort of speak up. But I think sometimes one of the challenges that we have is when we do, sometimes we do have to be really formal to be taken seriously.
Yes, right.
Right?
That's
And
correct.
then the interpretation is she's really standoffish.
So
You know?
now you're getting into something else that we as Black women have to experience. So, and this is a real thing. So we also have to like not only appear a certain way, we have to behave a
Yes,
certain way.
yes, that's
So we
right.
cannot be
That's right.
emotional. We cannot get upset.
That's right. Because we'll be the
Angry
angry
Black
Black
woman.
woman. That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Right.
And that is, everybody else around us could be upset and frustrated, but if we speak up and say something, it's like, oh, you really sound emotional. You really
Right.
sound, and it's like, I'm as upset as the person over here who's, of a different race or gender. But this idea, this characteristic of the angry Black woman being ascribed when we feel passionate or frustrated, is that's a real thing.
Right.
That's a real thing.
And we were told, it wasn't so much never let them see you sweat, but it was that type of messaging around how we show up emotionally in
yes,
public
yes,
spaces.
yes.
And it's because we could get the bad rap, if we emote a certain way or if we come across as being too passionate.
That's right.
That's a strike against us.
Yep.
That's why, it's really an awful place, which means that we have to taper who we authentically are.
Yes, yes. And our authentic reactions.
Right.
Like we can't be ourselves, right?
Right.
And it's funny, it reminds me, you know the poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar, We Wear the Mask?
Yes.
And it's that mask,
Yep.
and it's exhausting. We
Yep.
talked about this
We have
before,
talked
the
about it.
exhaustion and the fatigue, but it is exhausting not to be able to show up as yourself, because if I say this or if I object one more time, they're not going to listen because we know what happens, right? If we object one too many times, we're not taken seriously or we're not really given support, in an area, or they just sort of turn off your voice. When you start talking, they don't take you seriously, they turn it off. And then they just wait for you to stop talking,
Right.
Right.
So, and then they talk about you behind your back.
And then they talk about
Right.
you behind your
Right.
back. That's
Yeah.
right. That's
yeah,
right.
and it's so it's funny when we think about like this DEI work that we do and DEIB, that belonging piece.
Yeah.
It's really hard to feel a sense of belonging when you can't be authentically
That's right.
you.
That's right.
And as an authentically me person, I am an emoter.
Yeah.
I do have feelings and I can be very passionate about certain things. But I don't feel like I have permission
Yeah.
to just express that, in certain settings.
Right.
We do a lot of work around racial equity. And we'll show up in spaces where we are one of a few people of color, first and foremost, and then, Black women. We're Black women doing this racial equity work in a sea of white faces often. And it's really hard to show up and be authentically ourselves.
Yes.
So someone can say something that is blatantly racist, and we have to purport ourselves in a very professional demeanor, and we cannot react and be responsive because then we won't have clients.
That's right. That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
And so it puts us in a really negative light.
It does. It does.
Or makes us feel bad.
We've been in spaces where they've questioned our expertise.
Yes, we have.
They've questioned our data, right?
Yep.
They've questioned, our sincerity.
Yep. The research,
yes.
that we bring to the table.
We've been in those spaces,
We have.
And
it's almost like we have to prove ourselves.
Yes.
Over and over again.
Yes. Yes.
And that proving ourselves it's what I feel like we have just lived with our whole lives.
Yes. Yes. And I think that that's part of when we think about standing at the corner of race and gender, that's the first thing you have to do.
Right.
As a Black woman, as a woman of color, you've got to prove yourself. You got to prove that you belong here.
Yep.
You have to prove that you have the expertise to be in this space. You have to prove it, where it seems like other other races, other genders get the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
Right. So when I was leading an office in a state agency, I worked in this office for 12 years. Like I knew the content, I knew the work, and I was still, even when I was leaving, there were still questions about, well, are you sure? Should we check with? It's like there's nobody else I'm the head of this office. There's nobody else to check with, right? And there were still questions about my expertise and my competency. So even after 12 years, there was still like this undercurrent of, does she really know what she's talking about? And, my successor was a white woman. She did not get the same pushback, So it's like, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? And I go back to that word exhausting, but that's what it is. So when we think about, intersectionality and how our social identities, just sort of contribute to, the discrimination.
Different forms of oppression.
That's right. I mean, we really do, that the two strikes against us, that always rings in my head that we heard as kids.
Yeah.
You have two strikes against you, and it manifests itself in different ways.
And it's almost like in having to prove ourselves, it's like, okay, well, since you won't accept me like this, well, let me just go back and get another degree, and then maybe then you'll value what comes out of my mouth, and it's like everybody else doesn't have to do that.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
But it is a reality that we live with on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
We have to always check ourselves. We have to check our emotions at the door when we walk into certain spaces.
Right.
Otherwise, we won't be invited back. And it's just it's a tough place to be. And
it is.
That's not to say that we're not grateful for what we have accomplished and the opportunities that we have had, because that's really important to mention too. This is not a complaining session, but it's really like we want you to understand that things are not just they're not the same for everybody in society.
That's right. Definitely, there are just different experiences and different points of access. And even different levels of, perspective, when it comes to different populations. And so, I'm really curious to know, some of your experiences around this. When we think about, we're talking about the intersectionality of race and gender, but, there are other intersectionalities too, right? There's gender and ability, right? There's
socioeconomic status.
That's right. There's race and neurotypical or being non-neurotypical, right?
There's religion.
There's religion. There's all these different areas, and so the extent to which any of those areas have privilege or not really it shapes our experiences. And it influences the way that we really kind of interact with people, through our lives.
Yeah.
So I really did enjoy this conversation. And again, like Tonya said, this was not meant to be like a session where we're complaining, but we do want you to know these experiences that are shaped by the intersection of race and gender for us.
And that they're very real and that they are current.
Yes.
So we're not talking about,
10 years ago.
10, 20, 40 years ago. We're talking about right now.
2023.
Like, in the last month.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So,
that's right.
This is a really important topic, and we do want to hear from you.
Yeah.
But we want to thank you again for joining us. Continue to come back, continue to share, and give us your feedback. We really want to know what your thoughts are. Again, I'm Tonya.
And I'm Erika, and it's been wonderful having this conversation, and thank you for joining us again.